Hi everybody, I'm Jascha. I'm from Project 9 and we are also on I'm on Team 9 and we are also on Project F. We are doing the website and those stuff. We are today talking about web development frameworks. First, I want to give you a quick introduction. What are frameworks? Actually, first I want to give you an overview about today. First, we are going to give you an introduction. Then Andreas will talk about Backbone. Mina will talk about Backbone and Andreas about Angular. And I will talk about React. So, first of all, what is a framework? In the internet, I found often this description of a framework. Abstraction in which software providing generic functionality can be selectively changed by additional user-written code. Yeah. So what you should keep from that is maybe a few principles which differ a framework from library. For example, the principle of inversion of control. That means that libraries embed your code and call your code, whereas libraries will you will always use libraries. You will call code of libraries. So it's like the control in frameworks will go out of frameworks, from the frameworks and not by you. And the other thing is default behavior. That's a common principle. If you have a framework set up, it's normally have many default settings, and you can extend them by writing code and not by overriding this. So it's extensible, and you should not override framework code, just extend it by your code. They're normally providing you interfaces where you can provide extensions. So,
wait, can you go back?
Yeah.
How is that actually different to libraries, non-modifiable framework code? You said we are not supposed to rewrite framework code, but are we supposed to rewrite libraries code?
Probably not too. But
okay, so how is this different?
That's probably more a property of frameworks and libraries in general, that you should not override the libraries in general, okay. But you can extend them by using their interfaces. So that's, maybe you should correct this or something. Yeah, you're right. So when you would use a framework, many people recommend you should use frameworks more for bigger projects, and because they make your life easier, and they give you much generic functions and those stuff, and yeah, it's easier for maintenance. They give you a structure where you can put your code in there, and you don't have to care about how you have to set up your user authentication or something like that. Yeah, and when should you not use a framework? If you have really some small projects where using a framework would be a real overhead. If you just want to provide a static page, you won't use a framework because it's like an overhead. I know that's a bit, yeah, okay. And it's all, using a framework, it always involves a learning process. Yeah, that you have always keep in mind. Sometimes it's easier to go for the things you already know, and yeah, and not learn something new. So now I want to give this one to you and this one to you. and continue.
Okay, first of the frameworks I'm going to talk about is Backbone. So what's Backbone? Backbone is a lightweight JavaScript framework. It's based on Underscore.js. Underscore.js is a library basically that provides functional programming tools for JavaScript like map and reduce and filter. Also provides template, also provides event handling. Backbone framework is using the MV pattern. We've heard about the MVC a lot. Apparently MVP is another variation of the MVC, or not, like both come from the same family, the MV old family. MVP stands for Model View Presenter. So see there's a similarity between MVC, Model View, and the big difference between the presenter and the controller. So what's the difference? For example, a controller is the entry point for the request of the user. So the user requests a controller, the controller does the business logic, and then presents a view to the user. So the view is kind of a slave of the controller and doesn't know that the controller exists. In the MVP, the user enters to the view, and then the view is bound to a presenter, and then the view knows that there's a presenter, and the presenter is listening to the events from the view. Another difference is that the controller can be responsible for different views, but for the presenter is only responsible for one view, and each view has only one presenter. I'm a newbie to Backbone, and I was like trying with it, reading in it, and I found it a very, very easy framework. And it consists of basically 5 easy intuitive elements. So first element is for the M, actually the models. And as you can see, it's really easy to have a model. You just extend the model from Backbone, and then you have the defaults method that you override it, that you write the properties of the model that you have, and then also you can provide more functionalities too, like the toggle. So here we have title and done, and then when we have the toggle function, it changes the state of done. Another thing that also falls under the model is the collections. So collections is a set of models that you can interact with. So this is a bit confusing. What's the difference between model and collections? Usually in other frameworks, model is responsible for one model and the collection of models. So you can have a to-do.findAll or to-do.where done is true. But in Backbone, they made a difference. They had a model, which is to-do, that's only responsible for one instance. And they had the collection, which is to-dos, where you can have where done is true, or like fetch all, or update all. So they separated in 2 parts. And after this comes the V part of Backbone, which is templates. Templates are written in the HTML, and they have the type of text template. So basically the browser ignores it. It would never compile it or view it to the user. And this is the template that we have for each view. And then you can see here, like, yeah, we put the title, and then we have the checkbox for toggle or not to toggle. And the last part comes the presenter, and it's a bit confusing. It's the presenter part, but it's called view in Backbone. So you have to know the difference. This is our presenter part. And you can see you can extend that, and then you have, first thing you listen to the changes in the model. So whenever the model changes, I will re-render the view. So what happens in the rendering of the view? I go to the render, and then I go to the template. I initialize it and inject my model into it. And if we go back here, you'll see like this is the title of the model and this is the done of the model. So it's injected inside the template, and then it's rendered and showed to the user. And the third part is the template. We specify which template to use. It's the template with the ID item template here. And then we can listen to the events that happens on the view. For example, on clicking on the toggle button, what I'm going to do, I'm going to toggle the model done state. So whenever the click is done, I'm going to toggle in the model, and then the model is going to be changed, and then it's going to be fired the event that I'm listening to the change in the model, and then the view going to be re-rendered again. So as you have seen, it's very easy to be introduced to Backbone. So keep it in the back of your head if you have a very starting fast project that you want to get up really fast. So we come to the pros. As we've seen, like, it's very easy to learn. You can not master it, but get the feel of it in a couple of hours. It's lightweight, and also it's very fast with bigger application. Like if you compare it to AngularJS, whenever the application gets bigger, the data gets bigger, Backbone performs better. What about the cons of it? The template engine provided with underscore is not very extensive. It doesn't have a lot of tools that you can use. But the good thing about Backbone that you can replace it with everyone, like handlebars or something else. The second thing, it doesn't have a clear code structure. It's also a good and a bad thing. It gives you the flexibility to structure your code as much as you want, but also you have to rethink a lot about how to structure your code. And the last thing, there's no way data binding, is that it's only one way. Whenever there's a change in the model, the view is changed, but here stops the cycle. When the change happens, the view doesn't reflect on the model. So you have to implement listener to this and do it manually by yourself to change the model. Any questions about Backbone so far? Okay, then I'll hand it to Andreas for Angular.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about Angular. Now we've already seen some of its features yesterday, but let's start with some basics again. So yeah, what is Angular? It is a model view whatever framework, or also sometimes called a model view star framework, where you have your model and view for the data and your the view in your browser. And even though Angular uses controllers, it doesn't consider itself necessarily as a MVC framework, so you can argue whether or not this is true. Yeah, so why would you even use Angular in the first place? There are a couple of reasons. First, it is a complete solution, so it's not like React where you focus more on the view side. You have everything you need, and even if you don't have something natively, you can always integrate a third-party library. The basics are fairly easy to learn, so you can get results fairly quickly. It is very popular, so you have a great community which can help you. Also on Stack Overflow you find massive tags for that. It is slightly opinionated, which at first seems like a bad thing, because who wants to write code which others tell you, but it really encourages some best practices which will help you in the long run. It is open source, so I guess this is always a good thing. It is also maintained by Google, which means there is a lot of money flowing into the constant development of Angular, and you can be sure that it will last a long time in the future.
They kill a lot of projects. They just recently put a little Dart. The Dart that was supposed to become a great alternative to JavaScript, and they said we are going to build a virtual machine in Chrome for this new language, and they recently have abandoned the project.
Okay, yeah, but for Angular, I mean, you never can be sure, but at the moment it doesn't look like they're going to abandon it, so yeah.
Do they actually use it somewhere?
Sorry?
Do they actually use it somewhere for their own websites?
Yes, I think so. I'm not an expert. Sorry?
Yeah, and a lot of small project sites, like Summer of Code, for example.
Yeah.
I would think they would use it there.
Yeah. And also Angular was built from the ground up to be very testable, which is also a big advantage. Yeah, so let's take a look at a very basic Hello World application. You only need 3 components to make this run. First, in line 2, you need a special attribute called ng-app, which basically just tells the browser that you want to use Angular. Then on line 11, you obviously need the Angular library itself, and then from line 13 to 16, you have your Angular specific code, which in this case just instantiates an hello controller, which modifies the HTML so that we get an hello world message. We will talk about the individual components here in more detail in a minute. Yeah, so as I said, Angular is a complete solution. So you have your controller, which often uses a scope object. You have your models for your data, which can be encapsulated in a service, and you also have your view, which uses directives, and I'm going to start explaining the models first. So in the models, as you can see, we have nothing special. It's just in reality a JavaScript object. You have your properties and your functions, which are your methods, however you want to call them. And yeah, here you have just a simple model with one key and one string. Yeah, so services are a way of Angular to share common functionality. Now, a service is pretty much just a working object which you can use to define some common functionality like utility stuff, whatever, or also to encapsulate your model in. So here in this example, we create a new Angular model with the factory method in line 1, and then we define two methods, getMessage and setMessage, which we can use. Yeah, and those models are available in our application through dependency injection. Angular relies heavily on that. You can see we inject our model on the right here. My model gets injected, and also we use a scope object to access the view from within our controller. And as you can see, we use the setMessage function we defined on the previous slide to actually change the view to a different value. Yeah, so about the controllers, those are attached in the DOM via a special attribute, namely the ngController attribute. And then within the controller you can use services through dependency injection to, for example, communicate with the view, but there are also a lot of other objects you can inject in your controller, like cookie store or some objects for localization. For example, if you want to work on dates, you can, you don't have to format those yourself. You can just use Angular's built-in components. Yeah, and in the view we have this special syntactic notation here with the double curly braces, which is a kind of a templating system. We can just evaluate the expression with which is put into these curly braces, and Angular will do that for you. So within the view you also have the option to use directives. Now directives are a special attributes which you can just use on almost every DOM element, and they just are a way of Angular to help you access and manipulate the DOM, because as I said in the beginning, Angular is slightly opinionated when it comes to the development, and one thing it tells you is that you shouldn't modify the DOM directly, but instead use those special attributes to do so. And some examples are the ngApp and ngController directives. Directives can also be used for events, and they are in fact used heavily for that. One simple example is the ngClick directive, which just uses the change function whenever the button is clicked, and within the controller we can then access the scope through dependency injection again and define the change value to be a function which just changes the value of the button. Yeah, and one very powerful feature of Angular is the two-way binding. We already heard that yesterday, but just to bring it up again. Whenever we have a change in the view, it gets reflected in the model, and whenever we change the model, we also change the view. So yeah, well, as a consequence, this means that we really almost need no code to really wire up the view to the model, because Angular does all the heavy lifting for us in this case. And yeah, it's a really cool feature. So what are essentially the pros of Angular? Well, first you have a very quick prototyping phase. As I said, you can get results really quickly once you have the basics down. It is very expressive, so you can achieve the same things you would achieve with, for example, jQuery, but with a lot less code. It is easily testable. There are a lot of libraries like Karma out there who can help you write some unit tests, and yeah, also some end-to-end tests, whatever you like. And finally, Angular is very useful if you just want to write highly interactive clients. Yeah, what are the cons? The scope object, as we saw, is made available in the controller through dependency injection, but that also means that it is not as easy to debug as we wish sometimes. And also your whole application can get a bit slow if you rely too heavily on the scope object, because remember, because we used two-way binding, Angular internally has to watch each of these values and update them accordingly. Yeah, so when would you use Angular? Well, if you want a great framework for your client side, and if you plan to for example use a single page like we are in the project, Angular has everything you need. So overall, it's a very cool framework. Yeah.
So, questions now? Or
yeah, sure.
Let's just go back one step. Sure. You said that the scope makes it too slow, but the scope is not actually watching the objects, is it? Like, what is the scope? What is it in terms of Angular? Is it just a variable? Or
it is a service. I mean, it's an object which you can use in your controller to access the view, basically.
And I would say that's wrong, because scope is actually a service, an Angular service.
Yes, it is a service, yes.
So it's different. But as far as I understood it, watching only, like, there's a specific instruction in Angular called watch.
Yes.
Where you can watch variables, but the scope is not the problem here. The problem is watching individual variables additionally to the scope. Because two-way data binding with Angular is pretty fast.
Yeah, it is pretty fast, but imagine you would watch like 2,000 different variables. It can get really slow because of the two-way binding.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Further more questions?
Any more questions? Okay.
So, now I want to talk about React.
How many slides do you have?
10, 12? I should be
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, React is a library, not an MVC framework like the other tools, for building user interfaces. So normally it needs like something in the background. I will talk a bit about the concepts of React and why, and what it does, how to use it, and first of all, the one fundamental concept is the virtual DOM. The reason why they implemented something like a virtual DOM is DOM manipulation is normally pretty messy and inefficient and unmanageable. If you look at jQuery, if you have really big applications and want to work with that, jQuery isn't the best efficient thing you would use. So they thought about creating a virtual DOM, a tree on the client, which will be updated, and then the tree will compare to the real DOM, and the differences will be found, and then a patch will be generated and will be applied to the real DOM. So that's the process of how this virtual DOM works. And this makes this whole patching is highly effective. So they compute the least operations and the highly efficient operations to update the real DOM using the virtual DOM, and then just patch it. And so this makes React really fast. And yeah, on the Facebook presentation, they told something about they compared React to Doom 3, because Doom 3 had a similar approach on handling those concepts. Doom 3 had something like a world state which interacts with, which can change, and the front end, the actions can take place here with the components, and they will calculate it in the background, the least operations using some virtual view to get the output. And this is like in React. They have events and components and a virtual DOM, and they compute the operations and give it out to the browser. So what are components? They have a defined interface, internal state. They can be reused and composed. So you can compose different components and have child components and those things. And the goal is to encapsulate everything what is a component is using inside its own separate environment. Okay. Every component has a state. It's like a local variable, and the React documentation suggests try to keep it as many of your components stateless, because if you have a state in your component, it's not you have to test it. So it's not gives you each time the same result, because it can have a different state if you interact with the component. Basic React element is you can create a basic React element using this function, create element, and it's light. It hasn't a state. It is immutable. If it always gives you, for example, a div React element back, and yeah, and you can compose those elements inside of React components. Here you can return something like this, and you and other stuff. So you compose this, and components have states also. So you can also pass props into components. And each component has a life cycle. You can use these methods when you're creating your component. Like when a component is loading, you can set initial values to some internal states and yeah, and this stuff. And one thing is that there's JSX, which is over React, and normally you work with JSX, which gives you nice HTML-like interfaces where you can program your React.
Right, let's go on to the critical stuff.
Okay, critical stuff.
Yeah, it's optional.
That's optional. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, React is like all React is everything. Everything in React is JavaScript, no HTML. So you need something to work with it. Yeah. There's no routing in the background, so you use something like Backbone or React Router, which is an NPM module. Now, pros and cons when you use React. If you want to use React or not, React has a built-in XSS protection because everything is because there is no HTML inside of it, and everything is JavaScript, and it in the end will be rendered to HTML. And yeah, there are some ways to attack, but it's pretty solid. Yeah, it's fast and clean. You can really, those updates on React components are really fast, and you can, with this component structure, you can compose your elements, and you get a really clean structure of your components. And the next thing is it can be easy tested because every component has its own environment. It has props and internal states, and yeah, the learning curve is more gradual. You can learn the basics pretty easy. There's one thing that you have to probably get into how to compile your JSX to JavaScript, or start with working with JavaScript, with plain JavaScript in the beginning. That's kind of not so good thing to start with, but then the basics are pretty easy, and yeah.
All right, so we stop here because we're out of time.
Yeah, the rest is not that important.
Okay. All right, any questions about React or any of the other web development frameworks?
Questions?
Yeah. How is it actually better than Angular?
There are often those comparisons between React and Angular, if one is better. And you have to think about this, like React has a different approach how to go with it, and it has those component structures. React is like more a way of encapsulating your stuff, and it's really fast in re-rendering those things because of this virtual DOM, which is like easy, really performance optimized. So the view layer is really the view layer of React is really fast. So in big applications, you would want to use React probably.
Bigger applications, we want to use React, and Angular would be what?
Angular would be like not that big applications, so mid applications, but it's all relative, big and middle. So I don't know.
How did you decide to go with React in your project?
I decided to go with React because we didn't need we only needed a view layer really, and React is really fast with this. And but probably it would be fine with it would in this case it's more as a thing of preference and not about what's more suited for this case, because it's not a big application. That's what I think.
All right, now we're really out of time. Let's take 10 minutes. The next group please bring your laptop over here. Group F, please stay.
Good job.